ever read Rothbard's egalitarianism as a revolt against nature?
Yes.
It's one of the best libertarian pieces ever read. Rothbard says that if people went around saying that we could fly by flapping our arms, we should not say that that is a noble and beautiful goal, because it is false. It is a lie. You cannot fly by flapping your arms. And so when we go around telling lies, that's not beautiful. It's damaging. And Rothbard says that's why we should not be egalitarian. Well, I'm here to tell you that a lot of you guys are doing the same exact thing. And I'm not here to concede that what you are doing is noble and beautiful. It is wasteful. And it is stupid. It is. Sucking up to people who hate you for the 30th year in a row probably is the best way to maximize your vote percentage. If you want to do that, you could. And coalitioning with MAGAs to get a seat at the table, that could work. It could. But implicit in both of these strategies is that you are a loser and you will continue to lose. But there are some of us who aren't insane, who don't believe that we should do the same thing and expect different results. Because there is a way that libertarians can win. There are millions of us across the country, and we deserve to live in accordance with our values and our beliefs. And the candidates here tonight are giving you false strategies for how to achieve that. And it is implicit in their arguments and tactics. They are telling it to you. They know it in their hearts. But for those of us who still want the whole apple, for those of us who want a libertarian society, a libertarian order, a voluntary, fully private property order, there is one candidate and one strategy for doing that. Okay? And we need a candidate who will attract intelligent, capable libertarians who are serious about ushering in this order. We do not need more libertarians who are interested in getting votes by attracting gay race communists into the libertarian way.
Never mind.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Outlawed Thoughts, episode 82. Moving right along, getting close to 100. I'm here with a very special guest, Jeremy Kauffman, who I bumped into at the Libertarian National Convention. And obviously, I think I've interacted with you before on Twitter, but it's like the cesspool that is the internet, so that's always a bit different.
Yeah, and I am a little special. I think everyone has learned that by now, you know. But you know, I think retards are people too, and so I'm for retard rights, which is why I'm here on the program. And I think we're gonna have some fun. And it was good to see you in Washington, D.C. I always like meeting Twitter mutuals, and I like most of the people in the LP. I just think a lot of them are kind of pursuing foolish strategies, which is why I gave them that speech about kind of abandoning national politics.
But I like libertarians. I'm one of them. I get along with them, actually, to the extent libertarians are capable of getting along with one another.
Yeah, it always seems when you're dealing with a room of libertarians, there's always going to be a number of cat fights going on.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
I think that's
I
people,
think,
though, not even just
yes,
libertarians.
for sure.
Yeah.
And I think the convention was good. It's certainly an interesting event. That was my first national convention. I was sort of in charge of the AV stuff for my state convention, so I had done sort of that whole procedure before, so I was familiar at least with some of what was going to happen. So, but always a bit chaotic, which was interesting. I've been to a ton of big like events outside of conventions, so I'm used to the libertarian crowds, you know. But yeah, it was interesting. I thought your speech was specifically good, and so I thought it was worth talking to you more about that and talking to you about sort of some of the things you've been doing over the years. And everybody seems to be always getting mad at you about something. It was funny. You're probably completely unaware of it, but like just about a week before the convention kicked off, I was involved with a bunch of people on Twitter calling me a Nazi, among other things, and a bunch of other stuff. And it was all stemming from me defending statements you made on a stream or on a show with that LP guy when you told him to suck suck your dick. It was all going back to that shit.
Yeah.
It was fucking hilarious. It ended up in this Twitter flame war between like 3 or 4 different people, and like all the Tower Gang people are retweeting stuff, just clowning on these guys, and I'm like, this all started because of a clip I had where I was talking about that whole debacle, and some guy took issue with it and decided to brand me as a bunch of random shit, but it was funny. Uh, I enjoy getting involved in all the shit wars, mudslinging campaigns on Twitter. So it's sort of where I came from on the internet. So I'm used to that kind of stuff. So.
Same. I mean, I also kind of grew up on those corner, in those areas of the internet, and it's partially just the culture. I always think it's funny when people take some of this stuff so seriously in terms of they want to sort of like scrutinize and find all these like secret beliefs or whatever. And I think they're mostly like not serious people because especially me, like I'm happy to pivot and have like a very like serious, fact-based discussion at any time. And so people who want to sort of, write it off as trolling, I think do so because, or want to label it any of these words. There's a bunch of these words, and they're meant to close the argument. Whether it be troll or bigot or sexist, or it's meant, this person is in this category of person, and at which point, you no longer need to engage with them or take them seriously. Libertarians will do this too when we call people socialists or communists at times.
Yes.
It's a rhetorical technique used by everyone, but that's what they're saying. And I think that they largely do that because they know that there are other arguments that they don't want to engage with. Do I sometimes put things in a provocative fashion? Absolutely, but that's just a strategy that works. That lets the discussions happen. And so yeah, that's sort of my take on that.
Yeah, the Twitter stuff and sort of the stuff that gets branded as trolling often, I look at as, and I've often called it in group chats, cultural outreach. and that term always has gotten some people irritated, but I think it's apt because ultimately, even if you're doing pure trolling, at some point that has a crossroads with the people who are actually in the ecosystem thinking and acting. And so the way people look at this stuff is completely wrong, and I think a lot of it comes from people's lack of maybe lack of understanding of psychology or sociology or these sort of things that sort of like, this is just how people react to things. If you put things in front of people, they're going to react to it. If you get things that are necessarily brash or harsh statements or whatever you want to label it as in front of people, you're still getting it in front of them. They're still reacting to it, and you're almost forcing them to have this moment where they're involved with whatever the thing they're reading is. And I think that's an important outlook on it that gets sort of missed. Because I've seen guys who are Twitter accounts that I would brand as complete trolls, but they still get stuff done. And it's like, so then they have a place, and you guys just don't see them as having a place yet. And I think that's something that a lot of libertarians don't. They seem to have an issue viewing anything outside their norm is immediately bad. And that's something I've noticed over time, where I don't see that with like the New Hampshire people, for instance, which is one of the reasons I've got along with a lot of them. Same thing with Florida people. I get along with the Florida affiliate and a lot of those guys because they're also just more like sort of outside all the bullshit. They keep themselves sort of insular, and I think that's important because of what's happening in the cultural side of the liberty movement, or however people want to phrase it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm trying to create a thick libertarianism. Ultimately, I view myself as a fairly thin libertarian who actually would be more welcoming of the sort of leftist or more progressive libertarian if they could accept themselves and recognize that these differences existed. I find that they mostly cannot. And so if it's a binary choice, then I'm squarely with the right, the right libertarians
Exactly.
and the more conservative libertarians. But and this is why part of why specifically and with intent, part of why both I do what I do as well as what LPNH does, what it does is we want to show that we don't exist only within the progressive worldview, that we will only make arguments within the progressive sphere of acceptability, which is largely the mainstream sphere of acceptability, right? This idea that, you know, I think you could look at where it's Pride Month, right? And so, to me, and I really do. And people, so this is what's hard is you make these arguments, and then people they want to believe you have these secret beliefs in your heart. Like I don't hold animosity towards gay people. I had lunch with a gay friend, literally yesterday, and we were just having lunch together, talking about his business, and he's a friend of mine. And so to me, if you're allowed to, if being gay is fine, I think it should be fine. It should also be fine to find being gay immoral or to not like it. It's almost like a more radical form of progressivism, and I feel like the sort of lefties and the progressives aren't actually open-minded. They're very hostile towards anything they view as right wing or conservative. So it's this sort of fake. It to me, the whole thing is fake and wrong.
Yeah, it is, and it's a lot of I think it's also there is this leftist tendency of virtue signaling, and it was super evident over the whole cancel culture movement and the sort of post-Obama years in politics that was very clearly evidently there, and everybody in the libertarian movement and the conservative movement seemed to recognize that, and now it's like you have people who come into movements from the left or are on the left, and I see so many of those people keeping that tactic. And I think that's something that libertarians have to get better at calling out, and people who are conservative have to get better at calling out. Because it's like, that stuff is cancerous. Like, if you allow that to sort of displace a political movement, what happens is all those people that are virtue signaling, that's how you get these people labeling people as Nazis and doing those whole movements in political movements. And that is mostly a leftist tactic. But what's happened, I've noticed, is now you have people on the right using it because it's so normalized to sort of do that type of virtue signaling that it's become everywhere on social media, everywhere in like the discourse. And so I think that's something that I've noticed a lot more. But in general, I think like I've talked about here in my state, being in Alaska, like we're a smaller libertarian affiliate, but I've always made the argument that that regardless of the size of the affiliate here, Alaska is still culturally about maybe 20 to 35% libertarian. The general populace in the state is they don't want to deal with government. They don't want to see a cop. They live in the middle of nowhere. If you go into the cities in the state, that disintegrates, right? That culture of sort of individuality is just gone. And I think that exists pretty much in most big cities I've been to, and I've been to a lot of them now. I that sort of shrinks the more population you get in these big government sort of mapped out areas. But Alaska and New Hampshire are similar in an aspect because they have so many sort of rural communities that are sort of off the beaten path, not necessarily right in the middle of the thick of things. And so I think, I've seen a lot of follow a lot of people in the New Hampshire kind of Free State Project movement over there, and it seems like there are a lot of people who live very similarly to the way people here are. And so I see sort of that shared bit of stuff there. Florida has that too, because you've got a lot of homesteading types over there. It's obviously a different climate. Up in New Hampshire, at least you guys get snow. It makes me feel like it's a little more similar to us.
Yeah, I mean, I always love talking to the Alaska people about New Hampshire because it's one of the few places I can appeal to and say, come and enjoy this tropical weather.
Yeah, it's nice. I look at the weather charts over there and I'm like, wow, it's like it's not a huge improvement, but it's an improvement enough on the weather during the summer. It'd be great.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the microphone probably doesn't quite pick it up, but there are birds chirping outside my window. Right now I've got the windows open. It's a beautiful day in New Hampshire, as it is a decent portion of the year. I think I agree with all of your takes on those states. Those are the better states. Even people who aren't sold on New Hampshire, something that I think all libertarians need to get on board with is we need to leave bad states for better states. There is no sign of things getting better nationally. So even if you're not a New Hampshire, maximalist yet, clearly concentration is the way to go. Having this kind of thing available to you during COVID, was incredible because you can have, a bubble who's immune to these things. And these sort of, even if we're way down from the hysteria that was COVID, it's clear that we're going to continue to have these sort of, there's going to be various national sentiment on various issues that if you're a libertarian, you might not want to have to swim with the tide on. And so having, a bubble or a pocket or a community anywhere, I think is very valuable rather than just having to keep your head down all the time.
Yeah, I have I've been working on it for like 3 years, but it's one of the things I was talking to people at the convention. But I'm making this documentary about this guy named Joe Vogler, who's behind me right here. He's this guy from Alaska who created the Alaskan Independence Party back in like the 70s. But what I found so interesting about his thing, and it's sort of similar to sort of the opinions that a lot of the Free State people had, was like he was trying to intrigue people to move to Alaska first off. But his argument was this legal argument he had. He was a lawyer, and so he made this argument about statehood and was making arguments about how we should have a revote, basically, for the Statehood Act. And what I found interesting about him is like it's an instance where this guy came into being where there was a population in the state of like less than 200,000 people. And he got like something like 15% of the state to sign this petition, which I looked at it in terms of back then, and I'm going, this is traveling around in the 70s. Like, it wasn't as easy to get around the state as it might sound. Like, that's kind of insane that he was able to do that. And so I started looking into some of his stuff. But he talks a lot about like concentration of political power, and that like you have, and I think New Hampshire has proven that this is doable, that it can be done basically, and that it's super worthwhile to get it done.
Yeah.
Right now, I mean, like I'm running for office over here and stuff. New Hampshire and Florida are on like a short list of places that eventually I will have either a place to go or will live. A lot of people in Alaska like to do the 6 months on, 6 months off thing. But regardless of the situation, I'm opening a business here, and the whole goal is to funnel that money into getting some places set up in all the states that I view as sort of pro-liberty, so that I can kind of just hop back and forth and do shows and interview people and have a place to go when I'm doing it in all the different places. So if I can start a business over here, then I can go over and start a business in Florida, and then start one in New Hampshire, and have a spot in each place I can bounce back to, and kind of keep a like liberty circle going.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I think every libertarian needs to visit New Hampshire at least once, or really a couple of times. And it's not even about moving here necessarily. There's just all kinds of lessons and interesting things that are happening here, where there's libertarian clubhouses, there's libertarian meetups on the regular, where there's just 50 people or 100 people together. I mean, even just literally tonight there will be what's called it's called the New Mover Party, but it's kind of just a monthly party that a lot of people attend. There'll probably be there'll be at least 50 people there, 50 libertarians tonight, just on a semi-random Tuesday. So this kind of thing is very normal. And but I actually see all of this as still like relatively early. I see the potential, if you were able to achieve, a libertarian polity, like for real, the potential is enormous. I mean, the amount of trapped business opportunity in a variety of fields, whether that be finance, medicine, various technological products, even even being, I mean, think about if you had a polity where you could meaningfully defect from various aspects of the IP regime. Who not so many aspects of things are a sort of global government net, and so the idea, and now those things might not be achievable. It might be that some of those things you would have to give up to even have the hope of having a libertarian polity, like, because otherwise you just get nuked or whatever. But even if you can't get all of it, there's so much out there, and so we get caught up in thinking relatively rather than absolutely. And I think I like to try to keep it on the absolute, And so I see us as actually being, we've on the absolute scale, we've moved a little bit, and that we've gotten to the front of the relative pack. But we've got a long way to go. And so what you would hopefully want is a movement that's continuing to accelerate, that the small, what are ultimately in the grander scheme, these small initial victories are proof that this can work. And then it's, it's a snowball. That would be what you really, really want to be. That you're building this kind of momentum into something over time.
Absolutely. I think New Hampshire definitely stands as the best chance to do that right now, because you guys have had this, obviously, almost looking at it like infrastructure. You guys have already set in these sort of infrastructure ties. You have the sort of ecosystem already built, and so people, funneling in have some place to go, which I think is sort of the important part. And as time goes on, I think we're going to see that obviously grow. I think it's interesting with I see a lot of some of the complaints I see, about moving to New Hampshire, so to say, is like the cost and stuff. But I looked into a lot of that stuff, and it's not as bad as people would think. It's I come from a place in Seward where we pay like basically the same I would be paying over there to move. It's not far off. So it's not a huge jump. And I've looked at, obviously for me, when I move, I'm gonna be wanting to like buy stuff, because I don't wanna rent and be back in that position anymore. Like, that's what I'm doing now, which is why I'm starting the business, is sort of to get out of that position, because I'm tired of it. I want to have my own spots. And so I think that's something New Hampshire obviously has. You guys have a lot of land still. You guys have and the land that you guys have is gorgeous, like from what I've seen. So I'm planning a trip over there here, kind of sort of in the back, after I'm done with this campaign, going over and visiting with people. Not really maybe doing an event, but just coming over to hang out and spending like a week over there to check things out.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to do it. There's always stuff going on. FSP.org/calendar has public events. I do think for people visiting, it's always good to reach out to either the Free State Project or myself, or a random Twitter mutual, if you or whatever, because there's often, not every event is on calendar. There's off calendar stuff. There's and things like that, or introductions, or meeting people, and that kind of thing. So but everyone's very friendly. People from New Hampshire we're like libertarian Mormons, where it's like, why are they so nice? It's like a little bit weird. I'm kidding. Actually, I'm kidding, and I'm serious, of course. But I really like Mormons. They're always really nice. Yeah. Yeah.
I live in a town that's full of Mormons. Seward is the town I live in, has a pretty heavy Mormon population, so I'm used to seeing like the missionaries and stuff around town here, and it's always funny, because they're always the most polite in the room, and they're always the most well dressed. So it's always hilarious to see them
Right?
interact with
How can you not
Alaskans.
like them? They put their like South Park people, Parker and Stone. They made their sort of anti-Mormon kind of
Mhm.
comedic thing, and the Mormons just advertised in it. I mean, that's just
Oh, well, the Book of Mormon, they
that's
famously,
yeah,
they took
yeah,
out ads. Yeah, they took
exactly,
out
yeah.
ads saying like, "Hey, if
How
you
can you
like
not
this,
love
come
them? Yeah,
check us out."
yeah.
No, I think that's great. I think no, I mean, I've talked a lot about, I think the Free State Project is doing a lot of good, and I think it's something that I'm interested to see where it grows and how it keeps going. And I think it's going to be interesting to see if some of these other states that we were talking about, sort of, obviously on my end, we're a bit down the road. We've got some building to do here, but over in like Florida and stuff, I've talked to some of the Florida guys about them trying to get some kind of thing started to have some kind of sort of a similar infrastructure where you have some place for people to go. And I'm excited to see if some of that stuff pans out, because I think a lot of that is a good idea. And I think, especially in these states that are sort of publicly being branded as either ultra conservative or pro liberty, which is sort of this weird crossroad, but sometimes it has a crossroad where if you look at Florida with like what they got branded during the COVID regime stuff, New Hampshire with you guys and sort of forcing the needle in some of the media aspects there, and then with some of these other states, you've got like Iowa, where they had like during the COVID thing, they were branded as like this ultra conservative state. And I'm like, it's fucking Iowa. Like, no one even thinks about that state, let alone thinks about it as a, like, it's ultra conservative haven because of their COVID stuff. It was hilarious to watch happen. But some of those states, I think, have an opportunity culturally to take some of that and go like, because I think there's going to be a lot of resentment in those states towards a lot of these media apparatuses, towards people that were basically saying those things about them. So I think a lot of that can be used.
Right. It's very hard. It reminds me of, well, a variety of situations. You could look at, I guess, various trans issues or pride issues or drug issues or so many of these things where the sort of libertarian position is just a nice edge for most people that they just can't be on, because so many people are just, conflating government and morality. And so this is why you see even inside a libertarian movement, the disdain for libertarian candidates because they're perceived as celebrating activities that other people inside of the party would only say, well, we believe the activity should be legal, but because you're the kind of person who seems to be celebrating them or valorizing them, therefore I find you morally distasteful. It's not even a policy question, right? So like technically both factions are agreed on policy, but they just like each other because they see the sort of moral position as being telling of someone's character or something. And I'm not saying, not wrongly, by the way, but like that's I don't know, that's something I see happening.
Yeah, and I think ultimately some of that is just the nature of politics. I think there's a lot of people in the libertarian movement who are not prepared to actually be involved in politics. And I think that's something you've called out a lot. But it's like, I mean, I'm somebody who pays attention to like house meetings in my state. I pay attention to like city council stuff, and I keep track of what these people are doing and how they phrase things and say things. And it's like I know how the game is played, right? And it seems like there's a whole bunch of people, in the room that if you're in a room of libertarians, at least maybe it's specific states, maybe it's people who just don't understand what they're trying to do in the long run. They're just sort of wondering, if you will. But they just don't understand politics. They understand sort of the social club aspect of it and this sort of meeting up and having these events and, oh, we vote on these, but you're not actually understanding what's happening here, the larger game that's at play. And I think that's evident with I think this convention, but I think I think it's something I've noticed since I've got involved with the movement. There's just a chunk of the party that does not understand how the game is actually played, how politics is done.
Yeah, there's that chunk of the party, I think, and I wouldn't say that this is all of them, what I'm about to say, but it overlaps very much. I got this feeling when I was at the convention that there's this chunk of libertarians that basically almost treat their party obligations and practices as something that, as like almost like a religious like ritual, in the sense that it's a set up, it's just a ritual that they do. It's not actually I don't want to say that religion is intended to achieve something, because clearly it is, and I think religion is healthy, but in the sense that, like, it's a set of rites, it's a set of practices, like, well, this is what I do every 2 years to be a good libertarian, and so long as I've done my duties, I've like fulfilled my obligations to libertarianism, and I'm a good libertarian. And you're right. There's like no consideration of like, would this work? Is it accomplishing anything? It's just like, I just do the ritual, I print the signs, I get the petitions, I get my 2%, and this is just what I do. If that makes sense, yeah.
No, I think it's a lot of I think it's a lot of people not understanding what they're actually performing in, and so they're just sort of taking on almost like a room of people. You get like 8 or 9 people start clapping, and the rest of the room will start clapping even if they
Yeah.
don't know what the fuck is going on. It's sort of that exact phenomenon taking place, where it's like maybe 30 or 40% of the people in this room don't actually know what they're even doing. Like, they don't know they know the action they're taking, the vote they're taking, or the thing they're balloting on, but they don't actually know the repercussions for the things they're doing. And I think that's something that is definitely an educational issue with the party. And I think ultimately that has to be changed. Not really, I don't think that's going to ever change from like the chair of the party saying something, or somebody in a high up level saying something in the movement. I think that just has to change by these states that we're talking about that have better cultural movements going on and have better movements going on, basically just changing it themselves and making better people that
Yeah.
have better opinions on things.
I don't know what you do with the Libertarian Party. It's tricky. It's kind of a problem, because there's a lot of people who clearly still believe in ideas of libertarianism, and I'm certainly one of them. But then you've got this entity who's like constantly doing things that's literally called the Libertarian Party. That's you're doing all these things that I would say the majority of small L libertarians like don't like or don't want to happen, but because it's all of the people in the party have all these these sort of attributes and character. Not all, again, not all. There are a lot of good people in the Libertarian Party, but yeah. And so
There are good people on both sides, really.
there's good. I mean, I think there are. I think there are plenty of I think there are some Chase Oliver supporters who I think are perfectly good people who who I'd get along with no problem. I think there's some who I wouldn't, to be clear, but I think there's some I would get along with no problem. Look, I actually think part of my opinion on Chase is honestly a more of a problem with who he brings into the party than even some of Chase's communications and attitudes, although some of those are bad too. But like when I was at the convention, like the best argument against Chase was not him on stage; it was his supporters.
Right. I had a tweet yesterday that went sort of, I guess not viral, but viral in the libertarian sense, got some views on it, because it was about the Scott Horton speech. Because when I was there, Scott Horton's giving a speech. There's a bunch of Chase people walking around in circles, creating a human centipede with signs, waving them up in front of the cameras and the monitors and shit. And I was at my table in the very back, and I'm like, this is disrespectful as shit. They didn't do this during anybody else's speech.
Yeah,
They
it's like, oh my God,
chose to do this during Scott's.
Even the Libertarian Party ends up being ruled by theater kids. Like, how did this happen? It's
Dude,
the theater kids are always in charge. What? Come on, like.
Well, I said to my to my sort of delegation with the Alaska people and stuff. It's like, you know, I'm a comms chair for my party. I'm going to do what I need to do to put out messaging and stuff that the party wants me to put out. But like my personal opinion, and I don't think people thought they were going to get this reaction, but I've been talking about this for a fucking year on my show and on Twitter. I had a serious issue not with Chase. And this was something people thought was a curveball, but I was like, nah, I've been talking about this forever. I had an issue with Mike Termott, which my issue is the Libertarian Party, which has had all this radical messaging and all this stuff that it's been putting out, is going to have a fucking police officer as one of its goddamn candidates. And I was trying to explain to people.
And an academic. Whoa, police officer and...
Yes. So what's hilarious about it is, in everybody's now in all these chats being like, did you guys look into Mike's background? And he had these charges against him for these things for violation of the Fourth Amendment and violations. I'm like, yeah, he was a fucking cop. I was telling you guys this for a year and nobody listened. You guys, like, this dude was in, I think it was the Pennsylvania debate, and was flat out asked, like, what is your opinion on your, you know, serving as a police officer and stuff? And he basically gave the answer of, well, I want there to be more libertarian cops. And it's like, okay, but you're missing the larger issue, which is that you're just bringing libertarians into a structure that is flawed. Like, that's been my perspective.
Right. I mean, and what would be cool is if he was like, well, you know, like I was always, and I haven't heard him say this, although I also haven't listened to him that much, but I mean, one, I would hope he's advancing, you know, privatize the police or fully localize the police, like get rid of state and national, and this kind of thing. And then also, look, if someone was, because this comes up in our movement here in New Hampshire, and my view is actually, if you can retain your sense of morality and use the power that you have and wield that to the maximum of your ability to advance the agendas of liberty, then that is a service. And so, you know, if he could say, well, like, look, yeah, I was a cop, but when it was a victimless crime, I looked the other way, you know, and so I was there keeping victimless crimes. You know, I looked the other way on victimless crimes, and I went after the real bad guys. Because there are a lot of real bad guys. We need police. Like I want police to be more efficient. I want them to be more effective. Yeah.
I mean, Alaska people miss it in some of these big cities. I mean, Alaska has the highest rate, one of the highest rates of violent crime in the United States. Like, so we've got our, you know, sexual crimes are through the roof. We've got, you know, a lot of those issues here. And so I recognize, like, we've got to have policing. My perspective on it is like, this guy's messaging during his running, and
totally, I agree.
I was talking about it, was never like, oh, we have all these, we need to reform this and get rid of that. And it's like, you know, I always came from the perspective, and maybe it's because even though I came from the right of things, I came from it from like the Alaska right, which is a bit different because we're like, you know, we want our rural sort of, you know, attitude to kind of stick around. And the you know, our perspective, when I grew up in a town where the response time for police officers was like 35, 40 minutes. So you don't really call cops. I mean, no one really did. Like, unless you needed medical attention, you were calling an ambulance, and that was going to take forever too. I know, because my dad died in my driveway twice. So it's like, yeah, we resuscitated him. You know, that was the process. So I've dealt with those kind of situations a lot and lived sort of. I mean, I grew up in a 550 square foot cabin with 7 people.
Wow.
So yeah. that was my upbringing. So I am very much like disconnected from the sort of soft libertarians that are out there that are like, I lived without the government connection. Like, we did that. And like, I knew people who lived in areas where there wasn't another person for another 2 hours, 3 hours. So it's like where you have to like helicopter and plane in food. You know, like those kind of places are all over the state, and people are like, those guys are not, they don't vote. They don't care about your political party, but they're just as libertarian as you are, or just as libertarian as I am, or the next guy. Because if you're a guy in a suit showing up telling them to pay taxes, they're gonna be on their fucking side rock with the fucking shotgun. Like they're not the not the typical types of government people government interact with.
Yeah. So, I mean, I am 100% in favor of that form and style of libertarianism. We've got plenty of that in New Hampshire. I do want, like, I want to see something. I want to see libertarians achieve something that can be more scalable than that. You know, I want to believe
Alaska
that that's possible.
and this is something that I think the reason that I'm talking about Joe Vogler so much in my recent years has been because he's somebody who his whole argument was Alaska is completely unique. You guys have to stop looking at it as like this place that exists like every other state. Because he's like, we're not even connected to any of you guys. We're 3,000 plus miles away from DC, the people who are making decisions on the state issues. It's like, this is absolutely retarded. Like, you just from a logical standpoint, it doesn't make sense. And like Hawaii, I think he, has a lot of those similar arguments where they're like, hey, we don't get any of these benefits that these other states get that you guys claim we get. And the benefits we do get are almost at an effect harming much of the state's sovereignty and being able to do things. At least that's how it is here in Alaska. I always point out to people, and their minds sort of explode when they hear this stat, but Alaska is 60% owned by the federal government. 39% of it is owned by the state. Less than 1% of the state of Alaska is in private hands. That is fucking insane. like to think about. And I've talked about this with a lot of gold and silver people because we have a big mining community up here from going back into the 40s. And I talk about how I'm not a big gold and silver guy. I'm not rushing out and buying a bunch of stuff. I have some, but I'm not it's not my main investment strategy. And everybody always asks me why. And I'm like, well, look at a map of federal lands. And you'll notice really quickly that they took ownership of everywhere there were mines operating. They just basically took all the land that they knew there was gold and silver on. That's what they did here. The national parks weren't national parks. They were robbing the states of their ability to collect resources. And I see it all over the fucking place. Like, I take a state and bring up the map of it, and I'm like, oh, it's the same thing. Bring up the next state, and I'm like, oh, it's the same thing. Like, Oregon is a perfect example of it, where it's the same thing. It's like they own 55% of it, and it's all the area where they were doing resource collection in the early 40s and 50s.
Yeah, well, the entire western half of the U.S., or maybe the western third, it's around the western third, western half, is much more owned by the federal government than the eastern half of the U.S.
I think New Hampshire you guys are a little better off. You guys have more state land.
We may have, I don't know the percentage of state land off the top of my head. I believe federal government owned land is around 8 to 10% here. And it's mostly parks. It's still, yeah. And it's mostly parks that are in the northern half of the state.
Yeah, you guys are killing it in that regard. I've had people ask me why isn't there a free state project thing in Alaska? And I'm like, because of that. Because legitimately to get land in any of the areas where you could house a big amount of people.
All right. Well, look, I don't want to commit any federal crimes on your show, but I will say it's one of the things that's sort of a problem with libertarianism and political reform generally, actually, is that you're attempting to produce a public good. That is you're producing these reforms. You're not capturing the benefit. You'll get to live under them, but that's what makes them a public good. It's mostly all so this is kind of a problem. The more that if there were a mechanism, a legal mechanism, again, we're not being seditious, and if there were some mechanism by which you could ultimately use that federal land to pay for the making Alaska, that would actually fix some of these incentive problems. Because we're libertarians, we believe things flow from incentives. The reason that things are so bad is because all the incentive is to loot, to come up to and it takes charity work It's charity work against profitable looting. And then we're surprised which side wins, you know?
So I have an interesting question for you then from a New Hampshire standpoint, because I've made this argument to some people up in Alaska. Alaska had the Homesteading Act 10 years longer than all the other states. And the reason that is because we got our statehood fairly early into the thing, and so they made the argument, we'll extend it. And so they extended it out 10 years. And homesteading was a big part of like how the state got settled and people got up here. But because they turned off the spigot, our population just stagnated. We've never gone over the levels that we're really at, which is like 750,000, something like that. Which is hilarious when you take into account how big the state is, right? Because our state is over twice the size of Texas, and we're housing basically a small city's worth of people. And it's like, this is hilarious to look at on a map. If you look at like the population density, it's absolutely laughable. And that was sort of one of the points I made to people. You have all this immigration shit going on. You have all these people that have spread up, and that the federal government has just admitted they're just carting all around the fucking states and just peppering them, wherever they can find a spot to lay them. And that's happening up here. It's happening all over. Every state I've traveled to, I've noticed it. So it's like, it's definitely a thing. And one of the things I've brought up is like, there's no people in these individual states really pushing for like a return of any kind of homesteading stuff. And I've made the argument here in Alaska, we fucking want to get the federal government out of our hair. It's the federal land that's going to get allocated towards the homesteading. Make that the argument. And basically, it's not going to be a short-term fix. But over 100 years, 50 years, all of that land is going to get eaten back up from the feds and be entered back into the market, which is what ultimately you need to have happen. And whether it's happening gradually or not, at least it's happening. So it's like, that's an argument I've made, is basically like, the left, I think, would support a bunch of people basically making the argument of let's go back to homesteading. And there's a portion, specifically the rural sort of Republicans and the right, that are living sort of in those communities, that would absolutely, in my opinion, support it. Because they would go, oh, this is what we did. This is how we get new people to come in and sort of, get sort of businesses started. Because up here, the homesteading thing was always like, the people that were coming up and building stuff, it's not like they're giving you land in populated areas. They were giving people land in areas that weren't populated to incentivize them to build up cities and communities there, which is sort of the whole message of the whole thing to begin with. It's like, okay, they opened up homesteading. There's 200 libertarians on a Discord that we all have ready to go that can be moving to those areas and starting that community sort of off the jump. And so I think that's something I've looked at.
Yeah, I think it's great when you can look for ways to appeal to the combination of self-interest and principle. When those two things are aligned, I think that's when you have some of your most powerful political arguments and positions. And so that can be things like you're saying, like, hey, let's pitch, homestead. This land is federally or state owned. Let's open it up to to homesteading, again, or let's open it up, or let's find ways to essentially to get it into the hands of Alaskans rather than the government.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got something that's both a principled position and that's appealing to to people's
I've had people reaching out to me asking me why I'm running for representative over here, and I'm like, well, because like I looked for people. First off, I looked for races over here where people were like bad on the issues. And the woman over here who's a Republican, but she's hated by the Republican Party here. So I was like, okay, well, there's a race I could jump into, and I'm the only person running against her. And I'm like, and every interview I get, my argument is going to be like, we need to get the federal government out of state issues. And that message does actually resonate with a decent portion of the state here, because they look at the federal government as the outsider and the state government as the insider. Eventually, Alaskans will have to be convinced that the state government is also bad in a lot of ways, but we're going to cross that bridge when we get there, kind of thing.
Yeah. And well, it's also important, you've got to be if you're trying to really achieve these grand libertarian, vision type things, it's got to transition. It can't just be tearing down, because, a decent amount, not all of what the state is doing, but a decent amount of what it's doing should be transitioning to some sort of more, private and more voluntary alternative. It shouldn't be going away entirely. And so, this is something I think we in New Hampshire have to start facing ourselves, is how can we do more of this? Because that also makes your ideas more persuasive if you can show that there are other and better ways of solving problems and doing these kinds of things. Yeah, and certainly something that third parties can do is introduce a topic into the discourse. Like, you can't win the election, but one you can potentially, especially if it's a good topic. I mean, I'm not saying you can make anything an issue, but if you have something that's being ignored that has there's some kind of virality to it, there's some kind of appeal there, but maybe both parties are strategically not addressing it because it's in both of their interests to do so, then that's the kind of area where that's a third party campaign can effectively. So even if you don't win the election, you may get people talking about this idea.
Right. Yes. I think you're spot on right there. I think the goal has to be to get winnable goals. And I think that's something libertarians are lacking. I think, and winnable goals, I think, as you just stated, can literally just be that you're introducing this idea to a zeitgeist of people that maybe haven't heard about it in a long time. If that's your goal, make that the goal and do it. But you have to have a realistic goal. I definitely don't think, this liberty in our lifetime sort of attitude of I'm going to run for this office in the state and win, and then it's going to all be over because I'm going to rip it all down. It's yeah, but no one's going to vote for you if that is your messaging. Because you're right in the sense that people do, and this is something I think most libertarians understand. People care about being comfortable. And so if you're up there on a stage telling them you're going to take this and take that and get rid of this and get rid of that, and you're not replacing it with anything, you're going to make those people very uncomfortable. And that's not going to get you votes. You have to be able to be up there saying something that's sort of a remove and replace sort of a push and pull nature to things. I think for me, with the state rep stuff, I was yeah, my main goal is it's something I've been hitting on a lot, is the infrastructure issues here, which is something everybody feels and sees on a daily basis. So it's that's an in where it's everybody locally in my town and these other towns know this is a problem. The state is the one who runs these highways here, and the sidewalks 6 months out of the year are completely unusable because they're covered in snow and debris. And it's okay, so this is an issue everybody sees. It's a giant eyesore. Everybody knows it exists. Your grandmother is talking to you about it because she can't go walk to the store because she can't use the sidewalk. It's something in people's heads. And so I think that's something that's no, that's an obtainable goal. I can talk about that issue enough and get it in people's heads, and it's small, but it's something I know everybody at least will go, oh, that's the guy who's been talking about the sidewalk issue. And I think that's something that is obviously how you sort of play politics in a way. That's how you and I think also picking who you're running against. That's a big thing I see people don't enter a race where you're going to lose because the guy is favored by both sides, or he's favored by, this party that controls 80% of stuff, unless you're actually going to have a good message. If you're just putting your name down and you're just doing it for that, I think that's kind of a mistake. In most cases anyway, because most of the people doing that don't seem to have much of a plan. They're just fill the position. It's no, you got to have some strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think running Libertarian under the Libertarian ticket is in a three-party race that's a partisan race. I just think it's very hard. And so I think you really have to have some sort of other goal. I mean, the Libertarians who win here, I mean, we have multiple lifetime Libertarian Party members elected in New Hampshire. They all got elected as Republicans. And, we even had 3 state reps who ran as Republicans, left the Republican Party. They all joined the Libertarian Party. This was a big national story.
I remember.
And none of them could get elected again when they ran as Libertarian. So for better or worse, this is an incredible amount of people are locked into Democrat or Republican. And, it's tough. It can be tough for libertarians to appreciate it at times, because I think libertarians tend to be much more independently minded than average, much more willing to consider ideas on their own. But most people just really aren't working, that way. And so being on one of the major party labels just gives you a much more realistic chance of winning.
Right, and I think that's been made evident, sort of, by how we've seen politics play out over the last few years. I always make we saw the supposed red wave that was supposed to happen that completely was failed, right, just a little while ago. And I'm going, during that whole red wave period, you didn't see a bunch of like libertarians had an opportunity there. They could have been getting elected if they were in other parties. Like, that was an
Right.
opportunity, right? So, like, I look at those experiences and I go, oh no, this is actually a thing people could have been doing, and no one is. And I think that's unfortunate. It doesn't make a lot of sense. All right, well, I think we've had a good conversation here. I'm going to kind of close things out at an hour. That's typically how I do it here. I don't know if there's anything else you want to share, talk about.
No, this was awesome. I'm happy to come on in the future. If people enjoyed my presence here. I'm on X. Am I supposed to? They pay me, so I feel like I should call it that. At Jeremy Kauffman, just my full name. I welcome your messages from anyone who's interested in New Hampshire. If you like sort of my vibe, the LPNH vibe, reach out to us. Reach out to LPNH. We're very friendly. You can also go to the Free State Project. They employ people too. Come out to PorcFest. Come visit New Hampshire, and we can really build something that's working. So that's always my bottom line message for the libertarians. But I love talking about libertarian drama and national politics and all that stuff too. So it was fun. Thanks for having me on.
Always fun. No, great stream, great interview. I loved having you on. This was great, and we'll have you back on eventually here. Take it easy, everyone. Peace.